sometimes it only takes one person to start something that affects thousands. In 1914, a Seattle music teacher with a big vision started an art school. At first, what is now Cornish College of the Arts was a music school. Classes in puppetry and theater, poetry and dance followed. Now Cornish is in its 90th year, an accredited college that boasts a faculty of professional artists and an amazing student-teacher ratio of 7-to-1. From an assortment of buildings scattered across Capitol Hill, Cornish is poised to consolidate into a new building in the South Lake Union neighborhood. Sergei Tschernisch has presided over Cornish College of the Arts since 1994. Sergei, thank you so much for allowing me into your office. And before we talk about the college, I just have to confess that I searched and searched for information about Nellie Cornish, and she's still an elusive mystery. And so I wondered if you, as president of this institution, could enlighten me a little bit about the woman whose name it bears.
Well, Nellie's an interesting character. Born in the Midwest, but came as a youngster to not Seattle, but to the Northwest, and then eventually found her way to Seattle. There is a book that's a limited edition that I think is totally out of print that Nellie wrote when she left Cornish in the late 30s that basically tells of her life story. I think she's a remarkable character. I'm just thinking back in 1914 to contemplate starting a school is sheer madness, and Nellie had that in her makeup. She really had a kind of a madness about her and a dedication to education.
She was a piano teacher?
Well, she wanted to be a pianist and studied piano privately in various places that they lived, in Blaine, Washington, and various other places. In Oregon, they lived in Oregon for a while. Her father was a lawyer, and I think was a major force in her life. I think when he died, there was a big void in her life. And I think, frankly, all of her music passion and music training after her father's death went into the starting of a school.
It was a music school at first.
Well, she started privately, piano lessons on Broadway and Pine. I may be mistaken, it might be Broadway and Pike. It was called the Booth Building. She rented one room, and eventually, literally over a year's period of time to 2 years, she had 3 floors.
Really?
Yeah.
Just because she was a great teacher? Or?
Well, she attracted, I think one of Nellie's strengths was, she obviously was a good teacher. She deeply believed in not only educating a musician, but she really wanted to educate the whole person. She wanted to educate the artist. And in fact, she studied a certain kind of piano technique, which I can't remember the man who thought it up. It's like the Stanislavski method in acting, but this was a piano man. He based it a lot on the Montessori technique.
Huh.
So that just tells you that she was interested in the whole person, not just the musician. I hear she was not a great pianist, but she was a pretty darn good teacher. And her great strength was to spot talent, meaning people that were both already well-known and gifted, but those who were emerging artists. So they kind of gravitated towards her, and that's how the school basically began.
Well, that brings up 2 big questions. One is, her father was a lawyer, but that's not necessarily like a timber baron. So where'd the money come from?
There was no money.
Okay. Well, that answers that question.
In fact, there was a great struggle in her whole family and throughout her whole life. And that continued on in the Cornish tradition and continues to this day. Money has always been an issue for Nellie and her family. In fact, when her father died, she was supposed to receive a sizable chunk of money. He remarried, and she got very little when the dust settled. But so she was never a wealthy lady, although she knew quite a number of wealthy patrons in the Seattle area and actually lived in their homes, and that's how she was able to not spend money on rent and not and actually kept a diary of spending very little money on food.
And got them to help fund this place.
And got them to help fund the place, yeah.
Because I read that she lived in the back of Carey Hall. There's an apartment.
Well, on the third floor, it's still there. The apartment isn't there, but the room is still there.
Looking out over the mountains.
Looking over the mountains, yeah. It's really quite when Seattle wasn't built up yet, obviously the view must have been sensational.
Well, this is also a time where there were many strong-willed women, pioneer-type women. One thinks of people starting schools the way she did as kind of being the scions of the established elite. And so it's kind of interesting to me to hear that she really wasn't that. It was just somebody who had a knack for finding folks.
She had a knack for finding folks, and students gravitated towards her. But I think more than that, I think Seattle was beginning to grow in a large way, because all of a sudden money was available because of the timber barons. Don't forget the Klondike Gold Rush ended not that long ago. So I think a lot of people were interested in getting their children educated, in quotes.
But the idea, the second part of the question I had, the idea of this vision of the whole person and art, she always had that idea that it wasn't just that you would necessarily be a musician, but that you would study various kinds of art, and she started adding right away to the kinds of art she taught.
Well, the first was music.
Right.
After that, she moved quickly into dance, because again, a dance teacher just talked her into having folk dancing as part of the Northwest tradition. So basically, folk dancing was taught, and that eventually, expanded into many other kinds of forms. And then theater came after that much later. This was actually in the late 20s, early 30s. And then art came after that. But just quickly, when she found something interesting, she would bring it into Cornish, whether it was relevant or not to some people, but to her it was, because it rounded out an education. For instance, the first school of puppetry in America,
I was going to ask you about that,
was at Cornish. I mean, that's phenomenal. This is like in the early 1920s.
Was that before the theater, the puppets?
Before the theater, yeah.
So what, had she seen puppets and thought that was
she
great?
met this gentleman who was a theater-trained person, but went into puppetry and did puppetry in Europe. Somehow she enticed him to come to Seattle, and the rest is, as they say, history.
The other thing, as a broadcaster, I was interested to read was that she started this kind of broadcasting hub. And am I right that this was the first school from which a national broadcast emanated? Is that right?
Somewhere in her travels, she met Edward R. Murrow, who happens to be a hero of mine also, and began talking to him about the importance of journalism and broadcasting. And he recommended to her that the arts and broadcasting they're not that far apart. And so when she got back to Seattle, she started a mini school of broadcasting. University of Washington actually had a journalism program at that time. And Chet Huntley moonlighted and came to Cornish while he was attending the University of Washington and took some courses here.
Another thing that's been interesting is really from almost the start, the faculty have been professional artists as opposed to academicians. And I don't know whether that was by necessity or it was something that she felt strongly about, but that continues to this day.
I think it probably was by necessity, but eventually became a philosophy, which it does continue to this day. Because we basically have 99% of our faculty are working artists. That's frankly one of the reasons I came here. That attracted me. That notion of a community of artists working with students who are also themselves becoming artists. We have, as you know, and you've interviewed a number of people at Cornish, people who work throughout Seattle in all of the theaters and show at all of the galleries. And it makes it a very vibrant place and a very real place for students. Because students, when I went to college, I kept hearing one of my professors would say, well, when you graduate, you'll find out what the real world is really like. Well, our students, once they get here, they discover what the real world is really like.
So then are most of the faculty members, at the time they're teaching here, perhaps engaged in their art? They're not taking time off?
Well, they take time off, but that's what makes the juggling act interesting, because obviously, well, Timothy Piquet, for instance, who teaches in the theater school, or Richard White, who recently directed at the Seattle Rep and just did American Buffalo at the ACT, Contemporary, I'm sorry, I'm mixing up, American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. He would have to go off and take some time. So juggling that is, I think, sometimes difficult for the department chairs, but it's also worth doing, because obviously then the students not only see their faculty in class, but they can also go and see them in a play or criticize their artwork in a gallery. So it makes life on a daily basis interesting.
This is an accredited institution.
Correct.
What does that mean, say, in relationship to the University of Washington, Seattle University, all the schools that are around here?
It means you have to do a lot of work to get accredited, and a lot of paperwork. No, I'm joking.
On your part.
We just went through a 10-year accreditation, and we have just been approved literally, last month?
So that's how long
for
it
the
took?
next 10 years.
Wow.
It's the same, it's the Northwest Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities that accredits us as they accredit the University of Washington. It's the same body.
So you could get a Bachelor of Fine Arts?
A Bachelor of Fine. We are solely an undergraduate institution with basically 7 departments. And we're also, since you brought that up, Cornish has been around since 1914, but it's really a young college.
Right.
It became accredited in 1977. So a lot of growing pains have been going on since the 70s in order to not only fulfill some of the accreditation needs, but also to become a college rather than a community of fiefdoms.
Well, one of the things I wondered was kind of that line between the little fiefdoms, or what I thought of as kind of like the polishing of the arts approach, and a college, an official college. Is there a different way that students are taught, or is there a different perception of the institution?
Well, it's funny because Nellie actually left because there was a rift on the board in the late 30s. They wanted different fiefdoms. They really wanted students to be able to come to different schools and take what they pleased and not have a philosophy of a holistic student being taught in the arts. Nellie really demanded that. When I came to Cornish, I think I happen to, because of my own background in theater, I happen to believe in the rigor of each discipline. However, when you're involved in a college that is both the performing and visual arts, not to be able to have some interaction between not only the curriculum, but between the various artists, I think is kind of nuts. So we've been able to do quite a bit of that, and the chairs are really the main players and the faculty in that kind of relationship.
So does that mean that if I was, for example, a painting student, I would be required to take some kind of performing arts course?
You have, exactly, you have electives, and you're asked then to take courses outside of your own department, as you are asked to take humanities and sciences courses also.
Science? You have to come here and take science?
Yes. Physics and some of those good things, yes.
How many of the students actually know that?
Remember, music is mathematics, they tell me.
But you're from the theater.
I'm from
so
theater.
You didn't have to know that.
2 and 2 is 5.
Your own. You have a background as a working artist and as somebody who has been involved in arts education, and you mentioned kind of briefly that you came here because you liked the idea of how this institution was run and what its focus was. But you, in your tenure, which is
9 years.
9 years now, you came in '94. In that time, it seems that Cornish has taken a leap towards solidifying itself in the city, for lack of a better term. And I guess the most tangible evidence of that is the fact that at some point this year, I believe, it's all going to be mostly under one roof.
Well, Cornish has always had a challenge, even during Nellie's time. I mean, all Nellie talked about was constantly not enough room, not enough space to do what is needed to be done. And that certainly was the case when I came to Cornish. In fact, I became a hero very rapidly to the faculty, and I thanked them for it in my first year when I promised that each department was going to have at least a departmental office, because there are no faculty offices.
Really?
As we sit here
None.
and speak right now. There will be in our new facilities. Expanding on Capitol Hill became a major issue. First of all, a financial issue, because when the real estate market was high, we couldn't compete with the developers. Now the irony is, with the real estate market, especially the commercial real estate market being low, all of a sudden we're able to negotiate the purchase of some buildings.
Right now, for the moment, Cornish, we're sitting in Cornish building number 3,
Right.
which is one of 3 kind of yellow houses next to the building that most people may think of as Cornish, the big white Cary Hall where the performance area is. There's also, next to St. Mark's, a beautiful old brick building, which, was that Cornish North?
Now we call it Cornish North, yeah. It was called the St. Nicholas School.
And
many Seattleites know that as the St. Nicholas School.
And so for the consolidation, you've sold what pieces of property? What got sold and what is still Cornish's?
Well, this has been an interesting...
Maybe I shouldn't ask
No.
that.
This has been a challenging event at Cornish, because as a struggling art school that is trying to earn its keep properly and raise the proper funds, we obviously, in order to negotiate the purchase of new buildings, we have to also sell our property, and all had to be done in a timely manner. Because if you buy something and you don't sell something, you don't have the money to buy it, or vice versa. If you sell something and you haven't bought it, you have nowhere to go to return to. So it was scary at times. We have actually divested ourselves of everything, with the exception of the original building that Nellie built in the 20s. So Cary Hall will continue into Cornish's history forever. And in fact, the developer who purchased the property past the building is also building 50 parking stalls underground for us. So the building will have at least access to parking, which is a major problem on Capitol Hill. The new site in the South Lake Union area, or some people call it the Denny Square area, on Fairview, Denny, and Terry Streets. We bought the Lenora building, which is a 7-story building, Norway Hall, where our new theater will be located, and the Orion building where our sculpture studios will be, and we're negotiating on another building. It all came fortuitously together to have a campus in a 2-block area. Right now, we're strewn throughout Capitol Hill. So students literally have to take a bus down Broadway to get to a theater class and then come back to Roy Street.
Aside from the logistics of students and faculty members running around the city, what will it mean to the institution to be centralized?
Well, one of my frustrations has been the community of artists that I talked about. If you're segregated in different buildings and a quarter of a mile apart and then strewn throughout Capitol Hill, that community and gathering place is very difficult to bring everybody together. In the new building, that will not only be possible, the building has been designed vertically rather than horizontally. What I mean by that is no one department owns any floor. So students and faculty will pass each other on the elevator and the stairways from different disciplines, and that's been done on purpose, frankly.
So it's kind of the physical carrying out of Nellie Cornish's vision of everything being integrated.
I mean, I must confess, I didn't set out like a Bible trying to emulate what Nellie Cornish did, but ironically, as I've now recently reread her book just to remind me of where we all came from and who we are and some of the interesting people that went through the hallways here. It is ironic that some of my own beliefs are really Nellie's also, or Aunt Nellie, as many people
Miss
call
Aunt
her.
Nellie.
Miss Aunt Nellie, yes.
I liked all of those titles.
But also, it's the other irony is, I suppose, my being Russian, Nellie adopted a Russian girl. She was a teenager at that time, Elena Miranova, who eventually became a fairly known actress. In fact, she performed on Broadway in a Grand Hotel and then did plays in London. And I'm trying to actually track her career because I don't know enough about her, but she did very well. Also, don't forget, after the Russian Revolution, many Russians came here. And so all of a sudden and Nellie was smart enough to grab them up quickly. So there was a huge Russian influx of great artists. There's a kind of a Russian tradition that I suppose I'm continuing, which is interesting.
Well, those are the Russian people who came here. Maybe, you mentioned Chet Huntley, Merce Cunningham and John Cage are among the most famous attendees. I'm not sure if Cunningham actually finished here.
He didn't finish because Martha Graham came to teach here.
And took him.
It took one look at him and took him. So she was here, I think, for about a 6-month period, and then went back to New York, and Merce went with her.
And then did Cage and Cunningham meet here?
They met here. In fact, I've known Merce for a number of years, and he actually told me the story because he actually came to Cornish to study acting. Not dance, and he had this terrible Russian acting teacher that he did not like. And so he began to moonlight in the dance department. And one day he looked up from the hallway of being on the first floor, and down the staircase, as he describes, came this very strange looking man in a red coat. And that was John Cage. And they met, and then the collaboration continued throughout their life.
I know that Seattle theaters are full of Cornish acting students. Seattle dance performances are full of Cornish dancers. I mean, you only have to look at the pedigrees of a lot of the artists who are at work and maybe not making their living in the arts, but trying to make a living and establishing themselves, to see that they've come out of this institution, which got me to thinking about how Cornish is different from, say, the art school at the University of Washington, which is a far bigger institution, far more money. Why do we see so many students or so many artists with that Cornish pedigree?
I think it's, first of all, I ran away personally from institutions like the plague. I went through 5 different undergraduate schools. Oh. I don't think you need to go to an institution to be an artist. However, I think it's a great place to be and hang out for a while or for a long time and graduate. It's up to you as a student. It's one of the few, I think, remaining institutions in America, especially for the arts, where you can be surrounded and have the legitimacy of support from other artists. And again, I keep talking about the community of artists, but I really believe in that deeply. I don't think I would have continued, frankly, as an actor had I not been at a time in the late 50s, early 60s, when we had real repertory theater companies. There were companies where my family was not only my mother and my father, but a group of people called actors, musicians, scene painters. And I believe we provide that not only for our students, but frankly for some of our staff and faculty. And that you need that support, because we live in a country, unfortunately, as you know, that does not support the arts the way I think arts should be supported. And so that becomes a vital part of someone who is passionate about being an actor, a dancer, and a musician. And this place gives them that legitimacy where I think most other institutions don't.
Do you get to teach?
I haven't for a while, but I found myself, I was asked by Richard White to come and talk to a freshman class just a few months ago, and all of a sudden I found myself performing. I was speaking the way I'm speaking to you now, but I was starting to get a little crazed. I thought I was Robin Williams there for a while. And I realized that I need to do something about that part of me that needs to get back and do something in the classroom, probably.
Or on the stage?
Or on the stage, who knows?
We'll be looking for your name, at least in a local theater. You won't have to go far if you work in town.
No, there's lots of little cubbyholes where nobody comes to see your work. That's where I'll probably end up showing my work.
We'll be searching you out.
Okay.
Thanks so much for talking to me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks to Ann Gould Hubbard, we have this painting by Mark Tobey. It used to hang in the Pleshchev Institute, and Anne gave it to us as a gift. Merce Cunningham was actually here about 3-4 years ago, and he came to my office, and he was shocked. I mean, his mouth literally opened when he saw the painting. And he said, "What's it doing here?" And I said, "Well, it's very different from the Tobys that I know. It has always puzzled me." And he said, "Well, this was never a painting. What it was is we did a dance concert, and Toby actually created the set for the dance concert. And the tradition in theater is to rip everything down closing night. So as the set was being ripped apart, they decided to take a piece of it and put it into a frame, and we have a Toby painting that was created in a dance concert." That's the story of the painting.